Chapter 91. At the other end of the pavilion, countless women raised their heads and looked in a certain direction, their hearts filled with anticipation. In the pavilion where the competition was taking place, other than a few talented women, almost all of them were men. With their status, it was naturally not appropriate for them to go over. "Who do you guys think will win this competition?" a pretty woman asked with her hand on her cheek. "Of course it will be young Master Shen." "I also think it will be young Master Shen." "Yes, young Master Shen is so talented, how could he lose to a nobody?" The surrounding women all spoke up, their thoughts shockingly in unison. No one felt that the nameless scholar could win against the second talent of Qing and Fu, Shen Zhao. After all, Shen Zhao had been famous in Qing and Fu for a long time. In the hearts of these women, his position was naturally higher. "But that young master isn't a nobody," a young girl interrupted. Hearing this, a woman asked, "Right, I still don't know what his name is, Xiao Yun, do you know?" The young woman shook her head and said, "I also don't know what that young master is called, but when I came over from that side, I heard them say that young master is the one who composed Drinking Alone Under the Moon and Nian Nu yesterday." "What?" "It's actually that scholar." Among these women, there were clearly many who knew these two poems. After a moment of surprise, they said hesitantly, "If it's that scholar, he might not necessarily lose." "But why is young Master Shen competing with that young master in poetry?" Competing in poetry between scholars was a very common thing and not something to be surprised about. But usually, if there was no conflict between the two, it would just be a normal exchange of pointers. But if it was elevated to the level of a battle, it meant that the conflict between the two could not be resolved. The young woman who had just spoken looked around and said somewhat mysteriously, "I heard that because young Master Shen made things difficult for the talented women of the Yunying Poetry Society, that young master, as a member of the Yunying Poetry Society, could not stand young Master Shen's actions, so he stood out." Everyone knows what happened next. How is it possible? How could young Master Shen be this kind of person? "I've heard before that Shen Zhao was arrogant and narrow-minded. I thought it was just a rumor. Who would have thought? I suddenly don't want young Master Shen to win." "Me too." After the young girl's words were confirmed by a few other women who were also in the know, the balance in these women's hearts finally tilted. At this moment, a young lady dressed like a servant ran over from afar with a paper raft in her hand. She ran to the lady's side and handed the paper raft to her while panting. "Is there any news from there?" When the women saw this, they all crowded around him. "How was it? How was it? Who won? When will the bright moon appear?" I asked the clear sky with a cup of wine in my hand. "I wonder what year it is in the heavenly palace." That woman cast her gaze up and recited in a low voice. Her beautiful eyes suddenly burst out with a strange splendor. The few women gathered their heads, and after a moment, their pretty faces revealed the same expression as hers. This was written by that young master. After a moment, the woman raised her head and looked at the young servant girl. She asked in disbelief, "Miss, name." The young maid had run all the way here and was panting from exhaustion. She finally caught her breath and opened her big eyes wide. She hurriedly pointed at the bottom corner of the paper raft and said, "Name? What name?" The young lady, who looked like a well-bred lady, looked in the direction that the young maid was pointing. In the next moment, her beautiful eyes involuntarily widened. Her cherry lips slightly parted as she cried out in surprise, "Li Yi." The name Li Yi was not an unfamiliar name to the women of Qing and Fu. Ever since the Immortal Magpie Bridge came out, it was unknown how many young girls in love, young married women, on lonely nights, in the depths of their chambers, would recite, "If the feelings between two could last forever, why would they stay together day and night, while thinking of their absent lovers?" Even those unmarried young girls would imagine a certain scene in their minds. Perhaps in their erotic dreams at night, they would occasionally dream of that scholar named Li Yi. For the women of this era, a man's talent was, without a doubt, a fatal attraction to them. Appearance was actually ranked lower. Of course, if he was a scholar with both talent and appearance, he would certainly be pursued by countless women. Is that the Li Yi from The Immortal of the Magpie Bridge? Ah, that handsome gentleman, is that Li Yi? In an instant, countless women raised their heads and looked in the direction of the water pavilion in the center. Their eyes were filled with a strange light. I hope that people live long, thousands of miles apart. When Shinzhao read to this point, his voice was already trembling. Fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He suddenly raised his head to look at him and said in a trembling voice, "You are the Immortal of the Magpie Bridge, brother. If you have finished writing, why don't you hand it over to the scholars to judge?" Li Yi looked at him and asked with a smile. Hearing this, Shinzhao's face turned pale. He knew his own limits. The other party had even brought out such words, what need was there to judge? He was just asking to be humiliated. I lost. Shinzhao's face was pale. After squeezing out these words from between his teeth, he turned and left. "Brother, please wait." Seeing that Shinzhao was about to leave, Li Yi hurriedly called out to him. "What else do you want?" Chapter 92. Since they were daughters of noble families, they had been taught from a young age that their every action had to be dignified and courteous. Not to mention daughters of noble families like the daughter of Magistrate Dong or the daughter of the Qin family, even the slightly more famous courtesans of Qing and Prefecture were usually very reserved and would never publicly invite a stranger. Although most of these girls had only sent their own servant girls, the personal servant girls represented their own wishes. Li Xian really couldn't understand why a mere poem would have such a strong attraction for these girls. It should be known that even though he was a little prince and a relative of the imperial family, these girls only maintained proper etiquette when they saw him. They definitely wouldn't go this far. In this aspect, his influence as a little prince wasn't even as great as Yang Yanzhou or Shinzhao and other famous scholars in Qing and Prefecture. But, he had never heard of the daughter of Magistrate Dong ever inviting Yang Yanzhou. Li Xian was very certain that if Li Yi nodded his head right now, perhaps there would be many girls willing to offer themselves to sleep with him tonight. This kind of thing was not rare for scholars in Qing and Prefecture. After tonight, his talent would spread. In the future, he wouldn't even have to pay to visit brothels, and there would probably be girls willing to throw themselves at him. Don't doubt this. There are historical records that show Lu Yong and Tang Bohu were both masters who didn't pay to visit brothels. Spending a night with the #1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture was a good opportunity for those prostitutes to become famous. If they could get him to write a poem, something along the lines of flirtatious, graceful, and devastatingly beautiful, it would be a good hype and would greatly increase the attention of the market, and this kind of handsome, talented scholar was the ideal candidate for Rui in the hearts of the daughters of noble families. In his mind, the scene of Li Yi being surrounded by all kinds of girls floated up. If he could receive his true teachings, in the vast Qing and Prefecture, would there be a girl he couldn't handle? Thinking of this, Li Xian made a decision in his heart. He was definitely going to be a friend. Looking at the girls in front of him handing over handkerchiefs, invitations, and the like, Li Yi felt a headache coming on. After living 2 lives, he really couldn't handle such a scene. He looked to Lu Rui for help, only to find that she was standing there, staring at Xing Zumo. No one knew what she was thinking. Just when Li Yi was about to be overwhelmed by the enthusiasm of these girls, Mississippi Lu finally looked over as if she had heard the call in his heart. Li Yi gave her a look, and Lu Rui walked over slowly. The girls felt a gentle force pushing them away. Then, they saw the lady in white grab the young man's shoulder, and with a light leap, the two of them rose into the air, flew over the heads of the candidates, and flew out of the pavilion. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared before their eyes. This scene truly stunned everyone present. The atmosphere was quiet for a moment, and then immediately became uproar. Did I see it wrong? They just flew over my head. That's a fairy. It's over, that young man flew away. How are we going to explain this to the mistress? So powerful. Some of the candidates fell into a daze when they saw the Shui Jiao Getu. Only now did they come back to their senses and involuntarily let out a long sigh. That person's attainments in poetry were truly impressive. After today, the #1 scholar in Qing and prefecture would most likely be someone else. So powerful. Li Xian's eyes were full of envy. If he had this kind of ability, in the entire Qing and prefecture, whether it was the daughter of Magistrate Dong or the mistress of official Qin, or even the prostitutes in the brothels who only sold their skills but not their bodies, who wouldn't admire him? So powerful. The two plain-clothed bodyguards behind Li Xian looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock. This woman's martial arts were extraordinary, and her qigong was even more so. Before this, they had never heard of such a person. When had such a person appeared in the martial arts world? As expected, there was always someone better. The martial arts world was vast, and there were many capable people. When they returned, they had to report to the young master. The young master's guards would probably need to be strengthened. Deep shock appeared on Wan Ruoqing and Xing Zumo's pretty faces. They didn't think that the woman who had been standing quietly beside them was such a powerful heroine. After a moment, Wan Ruoqing came back to herself and sighed softly. Li is overflowing with talent and rare in this world. Once the Shui Jiao Getu appeared, it already stood at the peak of the Mid-Autumn Poetry Festival. If future generations want to surpass it, it will be harder than ascending to the heavens. It will probably be like the immortal of the Magpie Bridge and be passed down through the ages. Xing Zumo turned her head and looked at her. She took a small step forward and said with a smile, "Sister Ruoqing is right." Wan Ruoqing didn't answer. As if she had thought of something, her eyes suddenly looked at the table in front of her. Seeing this, the expression on Xing Zumo's pretty face changed slightly. She cursed in her heart that it was still discovered by Sister Ruoqing. With quick steps, she quickly put away the original manuscript of Shui Jiao Getu and held it tightly in her arms. All of this happened in a flash. When Wan Ruoqing reacted, Xing Zumo had already rolled the rice paper into a tube and sat in front of the table. She blinked her big innocent eyes and looked at her with a smile. At this time, she had only taken one step. "Zumo, you..." Wan Ruoqing's cherry lips opened slightly. Her pretty face was full of surprise as she looked at Xing Zumo. She was a little speechless. Now that she had it, a sly smile appeared on Xing Zumo's face. She looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, "Sister Ruoqing, you already have Immortal Magpie Bridge. Why don't you give this Shui Jiao Getu to me?" At this time, the top artist of the Jade courtyard was like a sly little fox. Her face was full of a smile of success. Not far away, Yang Yanzhou's footsteps stopped, and a wry smile appeared on his face. Someone else had actually made the first move. At this time, outside the garden, Li Yi held onto a big tree and closed his eyes. Only then did the dizziness in his mind subside a little. He had never experienced the feeling of a roller coaster in his previous life. After coming to this world, he had experienced it twice. He was extremely curious. As a woman, why did Lu Rui always not take the right path and like to fly around on the wall? After a long time, when the palpitation completely disappeared, Li Yi turned his head and looked at the pretty woman beside him. His eyes were filled with hidden bitterness as he said, "Lu Rui, you will lose me like this. If you can't even endure this little bump, you won't be able to become a second-rate master even if you practice martial arts for the rest of your life." The sword-hugging woman leaned on a book and glanced at him. The reason she gave actually made Li Yi speechless. As she spoke, one of her lily-white hands retracted into her sleeves. Li Yi didn't see the paper raft that she had secretly hidden. Chapter 93. Today, Qing and Prefecture was a city that never sleeps. No matter if it was the taverns, brothels, or other shops, they would all be open all night. This was because the profits from this one night were enough to cover several days of normal business. For a place like the tavern, half a day's profit was almost equivalent to 10 days of normal business. Only an honest person like Old Fong would give himself a break when business was at its peak. At this moment, he was probably beating his chest and stamping his feet in regret when he saw the booming business of the other Tanghulu vendors. After coming out of the poetry gathering, Li Yi thought about it carefully and felt some regret. Wasn't it a bit too rash to take out a name like Shuidiao that could be passed down for 100 generations? Even though he had gotten a jade pendant, that jade pendant could at most be exchanged for 300 taels of silver. Thinking about it, it seemed like he had suffered a loss. Just now, any poem from the selected poems of the Song dynasty would have been enough to subdue Shen Zhao. In the end, he had been too impulsive. However, it was too late for regrets now. He didn't think about it anymore. Calming himself down, he picked a pawn shop that looked more proper and walked in. An hour later, Li Yi and Lu Rui walked out of the pawn shop. That Shanghai said that this jade pendant was worth at least 300 taels of silver. The black-hearted owner of the pawn shop actually only offered 150 taels, cutting the price by more than half. Li Yi used 15 minutes to whittle the price down to 200 taels, but the other party refused to budge no matter what. In the end, when Lu Rui's delicate brows furrowed and her jade-like hand had already touched the hilt of her sword, Li Yi saw that the situation was not good and hurriedly brought up Shen Zhao's name. Otherwise, this pawn shop owner would be in big trouble tonight. It had to be said that Shen Zhao's name was very useful. Since it was the jade pendant of the second scholar of Qing and Prefecture, the price was naturally higher. After the pawn shop owner confirmed it, he finally increased the price to 300 taels of silver. Before he left, he deliberately stuffed another 10 taels of silver into Li Yi's hand. With a face full of enthusiasm, he expressed that if Li Yi could get Yang Yanzhou's jade pendant the next time, he was willing to pay double the price. If Li Yi was not satisfied, the price could be discussed again. Li Yi could more or less guess the pawnshop owner's intentions. For a talented man like him who was famous throughout Qing and Fu, there must be many women who admired him. Among them, there was no lack of young ladies from rich families who did not lack money. Buying him for 300 taels and then selling him to them, he could probably earn quite a bit of money. Li Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. In this world, talents are indeed popular. When he became famous one day, he could sell autographs, used socks, unwashed underwear, and so on. He could probably make a small fortune. That's right, he seemed to have forgotten to bring the Shuidiao that he had just written. He really shouldn't have. After all, that was the first edition of the manuscript. After he became famous, he would definitely sell it for a few hundred taels of silver. Was it too late to go back and get it now? When he thought of those women who were like wolves and tigers, Li Yi immediately dispelled this thought. With 300 taels of silver in his pocket, Li Yi and Lu Rui were strolling around the busy street. Naturally, he didn't know that the entire Mianxiu garden had already completely boiled over because of that Shuidiao. A few old men with white hair and beards surrounded a table and stared fixedly at the xian paper on the table. Xing Zumo stood far away and really wanted to snatch back that Shuidiao manuscript. However, when she remembered that the old men in front of her were all famous figures in the literary world and had extraordinary statuses, she forcibly suppressed this thought. As a scholar, your handwriting is so sloppy. What a disgrace. An old man's hair was standing on end as he spoke angrily. This caused the surrounding scholars to look at each other, but none of them dared to say anything. Although this old man's temper was explosive, the other party's status was there. Even the prefectural magistrate didn't dare to say anything. The old man had been an official for many years and had students all over the world. There was no lack of high-ranking officials among them. Prefectural Magistrate Dong was also a disciple of the old man. Now that he saw the old man, he had to respectfully call him teacher. After venting his anger, the old man's gaze once again fell on the paper. However, this time, his murky old eyes shone brightly. After a long while, he sighed and said, "What a good poem. People have joys and sorrows, the moon has its waxing and waning. I hope that people live long and live together for thousands of miles." To be able to write a Mid-Autumn Festival poem to such a level, I'm afraid there is no one else in the entire Jing Kingdom who can do this. This person's attainments in poetry have probably reached an unfathomable level. I heard that the Immortal Magpie Bridge, on Chinese Valentine's Day, was also written by him. Another old man beside him retracted his gaze and sighed as well. One poem is full of amorous feelings, the other is bold and unconstrained, the atmosphere is magnificent. It's hard to imagine that these two completely different poems were written by the same person. From today onwards, as long as the students of the Jing Kingdom drink under the moon, they will definitely think of raising a cup to invite the bright moon, the shadows of the three of us. On Chinese Valentine's Day, they will not forget the Immortal Magpie Bridge and Shuidiaogetu. I feel that if you were to compose another Upper Yuan poem, there would be no need for the next few poetry competitions. Just based on poetry alone, even if I were to call him the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom, there wouldn't be many who would object. The old man nodded his head, expressing his agreement. However, in the next moment, he raised his eyebrows and scolded, "This kid, has he never thought of practicing his calligraphy?" The surrounding scholars stood respectfully at the side. Hearing the old man and the other famous figure's evaluation of Li Yi, they couldn't help but be secretly shocked. The #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom. Since ancient times, there was no #1 scholar. When one's poetry reached a certain level, it was difficult to distinguish who was better. There had never been a person who received such an evaluation from them. The Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet was closely watched by the scholars of Qing and Prefecture. Any news would quickly spread. Not long after, a piece of paper floated out of Mianxiu Garden like flying snow. Some busybodies, including the old man's evaluation of the poem, handed it over without the slightest deletion. This included the praise of Li Yi as the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom. Very quickly, the news spread throughout the prefecture. In an extremely short period of time, various brothels were already filled with the tune of Shuidiaogetu. Li Yi of the Immortals of the Magpie Bridge appeared at the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet. In a rage for a beauty, he brazenly accepted a challenge from the second scholar of Qing and Prefecture, Shinzhao. With one Shuidiaogetu, he stunned the audience and actually caused Shinzhao to tear his poem twice. When the scholars heard this story, it was as if they were there. Their hearts were filled with hot blood and anger, and they only hated themselves for not being there to witness it. When countless women in their chambers heard their maids talk about the news they heard from outside, their beautiful eyes shone with a strange light. At this time, Li Yi, who was completely unaware of this, was still wandering the streets. However, it was different from before. Right now, there were many more things in the bag on his back. Pouches, perfume pouches, bracelets, hairpins, rouge and face powder. Last time, Rui had given him a piece of clothing that she had personally made. Politeness demanded reciprocity. Now that Li Yi's wallet was bulging again, he naturally wouldn't be stingy in this area. However, if he bought it for Rui, Xiao Huan would definitely also want a portion. Otherwise, even if the little maid didn't say it, she would definitely be hurt in her heart. If he bought it for both of them, he couldn't leave out Rui. If he treated Mississippi Lu differently, the consequences would be very serious, although this would seem insincere, but, at worst, he would just give Rui another gift in the future. Seeing Li Yi once again walk into a jewelry shop, the corners of Lu Rui's mouth curved slightly. Just as she was about to follow him in, her footsteps suddenly paused. Her gaze fell on the two scholars who walked past her on the street. Immortals of the Magpie Bridge. Shuidiao Minister of Education, that Li Yi, the first scholar of the Jing Kingdom, after obtaining this information from the conversation between the two, Lu Rui's pretty brows furrowed. With confusion and surprise, she looked at the back of the figure in the shop who was bargaining with the shop owner. Chapter 94. The liveliness of Qing and prefectural city would continue for an entire night, but for Li Yi, who had seen even more bustling scenes, after the novelty wore off, he no longer had any interest in strolling around. By the time he returned to the stockade village with Lu Rui, it was already late at night. He didn't see Fang and the others. These country bumpkins who had never seen the world would probably only return at dawn. Li Yi asked Lu Rui to bring the gifts he bought for them into the inner courtyard. After returning to his room, he washed up and went to bed. He didn't have Mississippi Lu's stamina. After walking so much and flying around in the sky, he was still full of energy. As he lay on his bed, he thought about a few things. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, he would start selling Rui's necklaces. Before that, he still needed to rent a shop. In addition, it was time to bring forward the matter of the factory. These few days, he was really exhausted. After these things were over, he still needed to rest for a while. After thinking about this for a while, his eyelids started to feel heavy. At this time, in the inner courtyard, in Lu Rui's room, the two sisters were whispering as usual. Lu Rui's face was filled with surprise and astonishment. Is husband really that amazing? Lu Rui spoke with interest about the expressions on the faces of the scholars in Qing and prefectural city when Li Yi took out the poem in Mianxiu Garden. Occasionally, she would glance in the direction of the window. Outside the room, the little servant girl carefully stuck to the corner of the window. Tonight, she had changed her hair into a new bun with a new hairpin that the son-in-law had bought for her. She tried her best to stick her ear close to the window. When she heard the whispers coming from inside the room, her beautiful big eyes sparkled and her little face was flushed. She looked extremely adorable. The son-in-law is composing a poem again, the #1 scholar. Is he more amazing than all the other scholars? The little girl thought to herself. When the voices in the room gradually quieted down, she raised her head and glanced outside before tiptoeing away. He had been busy all night yesterday, and it was already very late when he woke up in the morning. In the school, as long as he was not around, Lu Xiaohu would take the initiative to take on the responsibility of being the class leader and teach those brats well. Li Yi felt that he could slack off again today. After running outside, he practiced Tai Chi in the courtyard as usual. Of course, he found the books in the library. Regardless of whether they were useful or not, he just treated it as killing time. The scale of the provincial library was already very large, so naturally, there were other martial arts books. However, Li Yi had no intention of learning fighting, sanda, taekwondo, judo, and the like. In this world where everyone was a super saiyan, even if he practiced judo and taekwondo to the 100th stage, he would not be able to withstand a few punches from someone like Old Fang. And if he was unlucky and met Lu Rui, the future world boxing champion or mixed martial arts champion could probably be defeated with a single strike from her. After all, no matter how powerful those people were, they were not so powerful that they could fly in the sky. In the library, there were many traditional Chinese martial arts, such as Tai Chi, Xingyi Quan, Baguazhang, Tong Bei Quan, and so on. But those that could be displayed in the library were naturally extremely simple moves. It was impossible to get to the real core. It was fine to practice for fun, but it was completely impossible to become a martial arts master by relying on these. Of course, it was naturally impossible to find peerless secret manuals like 9 Manual, 18 Subduing Dragon Palms, and 6 Pulse Divine Sword in the modern library. Instead of relying on these, it was better to practice the martial arts basics that Lu Rui had thrown to him. Although he had not yet cultivated the so-called true qi that Rui had mentioned, Li Yi had been learning martial arts for a long time. He estimated that he would have no problem fighting against 3 weak scholars like Xin Zhao. A little further away, Lu Rui stood outside the arched door that connected the two courtyards. Seeing Li Yi doing some strange movements, her beautiful eyes showed some surprise. In the first few days, when Li Yi told her that this was a martial art called Tai Chi, Lu Rui did not take it to heart. In martial arts, speed was the key to defeating the slow, and the strong to defeat the weak. It was similar to what he said when he told stories about strange martial arts. In the world of martial arts, there is nothing that cannot be overcome, only speed cannot be overcome. When she heard this, Lu Rui was quite shocked. This summary was really straight to the point. In today's martial arts world, there were many different sects and schools, but they could not escape these words. However, such a sentence that could shock the martial arts world was said by such a scholar. Even grandmasters would be ashamed to hear it. When Lu Rui calmed down these days, she carefully pondered over the few words that he mentioned when he told stories. Unexpectedly, she also realized something and made a small progress in martial arts. Although she still did not break through the shackles and step into the Grandmaster realm, it was very rare for her to make such a small progress with her current realm. Therefore, when Li Yi said that Tai Chi was about defeating the strong with the weak, defeating the fast with the slow, and conquering the hard with the soft, Lu Rui just smiled. Defeating the strong with the weak, and doing the opposite, how could there be such a wonderful martial art in the world? However, these past few days, she had often seen these movements, so she still paid some attention to them. His movements were natural and smooth, extremely coherent, and didn't seem like he was doing it randomly. As Lu Rui watched, she couldn't help but imitate a move. It seemed like something flashed through her mind, but when she thought about it carefully, there was nothing. After Li Yi finished the turning and stroking, he saw Lu Rui's beautiful starting hand, full of beauty. He was stunned for a moment and said, "My wife, do you want to learn Tai Chi? I can teach you." Lu Rui smiled and said, "My husband is busy all day, you don't have to worry about me. I have nothing to do anyway, and it is not difficult to learn." Li Yi waved his hand. When he practiced martial arts, he was ordered around by Lu Rui all day, and Lu Rui occasionally came to give him advice. It was not easy to get a chance to reverse, how could he let it go so easily? Tomorrow, he would ask Lu Rui if she wanted to learn it. At that time, he would definitely make things difficult for her, reprimand her, roddenwood cannot be carved, to save some face. Then I'll have to trouble you, my husband. Lu Rui smiled slightly. At this moment, she was a little curious about this method of borrowing strength to fight strength, and using little effort to achieve a great deal of wealth. After a moment, in the small courtyard, the conversation between the two gradually became more frequent. This movement is not like this. Tai Chi is in a circle. My wife, try to experience it. I understand, for this movement, you have to raise your hand a little higher. Yes, that's right. After a moment, the topic was changed by Li Yi. My wife, your martial arts are so powerful, have you heard of the enlightenment method? What is enlightenment method? It is a martial arts master who, through a certain secret method, imparts his lifelong skills to another person, and the person who has imparted his skills will instantly become a peerless master. My husband, you must be joking again. Skills are not goods, how can they be imparted? My husband, you must have seen it in those strange novels again, right? Ah, there is no such method. Li Yi's voice sounded a little disappointed. Another hope of becoming a martial arts master was dashed again. Chapter 95. As for Lu Rui's speed of learning Tai Chi, Li Yi already didn't know what words to use to describe it. It was because he had a heaven-defying cheating device that he was able to master it in a very short period of time. However, Lu Rui only needed to be taught twice and corrected a few movements before she was able to execute a near-standard Taiji fist. Although there were still some flaws, she was beautiful and tall. More importantly, she had a strong martial arts foundation. The movements she executed were much better than Li Yi's. This made Li Yi, who was standing at the side, sigh in his heart. These movements were indeed different when done by a woman, whether it was practical or not, at least it looked extremely pleasing to the eye. Not long after, there was a knock on the door, which made Li Yi unable to enjoy it so peacefully. It didn't sound like Fang. The way he knocked on the door was much rougher than this. It also wasn't Lu Rui. When second miss came back, she never had to go through the trouble of knocking on the door. She could just fly in from outside. Li Yi walked over and opened the door. He saw two middle-aged men standing behind the door, their faces full of smiles. Seeing the two men, Li Yi was stunned for a moment. They looked familiar. He thought that he had seen them before. After thinking carefully, he remembered that it was last night. The two of them sent some eggs and mooncakes, and then he sent Xiao Huan away. As for their identity, it seemed that they were one of Lu's sister Rui's uncles. They belonged to the direct line of descent. Ever since the Lu clan settled down here, the two girls had quite a few uncles after a few generations of inheritance. It had to be said that the Lu family's ability to produce sons was not just for show. It was said that Lu Rui's grandfather had 5 brothers, and the 5 of them each had their own children, giving birth to a bunch of sons. They were Lu Rui and her sister's uncles. On the other hand, the direct line of descent was only passed down from Lu Rui's father's line. There were only 2 girls in the next generation. 4th uncle, 7th uncle, what's the matter? Although Lu Rui had never gotten along with these people, as juniors, she still had the necessary etiquette. Lu Rui walked over and bowed to the 2 of them. Let's talk inside, let's talk inside. Seeing that Li Yi and Lu Rui didn't seem to want to invite them in, the 2 of them laughed dryly. May I know why 4th uncle and 7th uncle have come this time? After a while, Lu Rui looked at the 2 of them and asked again. Most of these uncles weren't on good terms with her and her sister. Yesterday, the 2 of them had eagerly sent gifts over, which had already made her extremely surprised. Now that he had come to visit again, it seemed that he really did have something important to do. The 2 of them looked hesitant, but their eyes flashed with determination. They took out a few pieces of yellowed paper and placed them on the table in front of them. 4th uncle, what do you mean? Lu Rui looked at the things on the table and turned to look at him. Finally, a trace of doubt appeared in her beautiful eyes. When her father was still alive, the village was one, but when he had an accident, those uncles immediately wanted to separate from the family. The 2 sisters were still young at that time, and almost all the things that belonged to them were taken away. At that time, the other party didn't give them any face at all. Why did their temperament change now? The middle-aged man on the left said, Rui, what happened in the past was our fault. When we separated from the family, these land deeds should have belonged to you and Rui. You should accept them. 4th uncle, what do you want to say? Just say it. Of course, Lu Rui wouldn't think that they suddenly found their conscience and wanted to return the things that they had taken away. There must be a bigger plot for them to act like this. The middle-aged man hesitated for a while and said again, since Rui said so, I'll say it directly. You know, these 2 years have not been good, and life at home has been really hard. In a few days, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to even eat. Look, the sugar-coated haws made by the son-in-law are so popular. Can we? At this point, the middle-aged man's meaning was already very clear. Although the sugar-coated haws business was good, people only recognized the loose sugar-coated haws sold by Fang and the others. The business of other vendors was still bleak and pitiful. If they also wanted to make a fortune by selling sugar-coated haws, even if they got the secret recipe, without their consent, they couldn't use the name of the Lus, and the profit would still be pitiful. If they could get their consent and start the sugar-coated haws business, then this land wouldn't be much at all. The land in the stockade wasn't considered good farmland to begin with. When the year was good, the production could more or less meet the needs of life. If it was a disaster year like last year, there was almost no harvest for the whole year, then what was the use of the land? If they had known that Rui would be able to snatch such a son-in-law in a few years, there would have been no separation of the family that year. They would have desperately fawned on the two sisters if they could. "Husband, you decide on this matter." Lu Rui didn't answer them. She turned her head and said to Li Yi. Regarding the sugar-coated haws, he had been the one doing it from beginning to end. Lu Rui had never asked, so naturally, she wouldn't make the decision for him at this time. In fact, Li Yi had already roughly understood the intentions of Lu Rui's uncles last night. The status of the Lu's sugar-coated haws in Qing and prefectural city was roughly equivalent to the old Beijing sugar-coated haws of later generations. It was a time-honored brand with guaranteed quality. They were only after this name. He turned to look at the two and smiled. "Fourth uncle. Seventh uncle, right?" "Ah." The two knew in their hearts that whether or not they could succeed today depended on the scholar in front of them. They hurriedly responded, and the smile on their faces became even more amiable. Li Yi's expression was hesitant. He revealed a thoughtful expression and said, "It's not impossible for you to use the Lu's name to sell sugar-coated haws, but what?" The two immediately asked. "But you can only do it in the form of an alliance," Li Yi said, looking at them. "What do you mean by an alliance?" The two looked at each other and asked Li Yi in confusion. Even Lu Rui's beautiful eyes showed a trace of doubt. It was clearly the first time she had heard of such a term. The meaning of an alliance is very simple. "We can agree to let you use the Lu's name to sell sugar-coated haws, but we will take half of the daily profits," Li Yi said, looking at them. The Lu's sugar-coated haws name was not so easy to spread. It was not very realistic to ask them to fork out a large sum of money in advance. Explaining the concept of an alliance to them in the future was also like playing the lute to a cow. They could only use this simple and crude method. 50%. The two of them exclaimed at the same time. This number, for them, was a little too much to bear. No one would be willing to give half of the hard-earned money to someone else. "Son-in-law, isn't 50% a little too much?" Fourth uncle of the Lu's looked at Li Yi and asked with some difficulty. Li Yi smiled without saying anything, indicating that there was no room for discussion on this matter. "After bullying my wife and sister-in-law for so many years, it was time to pay back some interest. Let us think about this matter." Li Yi smiled as he watched the two of them walk out the door, waiting patiently. After a moment, the two of them walked back in. Fourth uncle thought for a moment, then said, 50% is really a little too much. We'll go back and think about it. I'll give you an answer tomorrow." He was obviously extremely unwilling to give half of the profits to others. After the discussion between the two of them just now, when they went back, they would join forces with the other direct family members to put pressure on them. It would be best if they could waive the alliance fee, but if that was not possible, it was not impossible to reduce it to half. After saying that, he turned around and walked out the door. "Rui, son-in-law, without your agreement, I won't be able to earn even 50%. 50%, then 50%. I agree." Fourth uncle of the Lu's had one foot out the door when he heard the familiar voice of seventh uncle behind him. Bang! Fourth uncle of the Lu's tripped on the door sill, and his body flew forward half a foot before landing heavily on the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. Fourth uncle, why are you so polite?" Not too far away from him, old Fong was standing there, looking at the scene before him with a look of astonishment on his face. Chapter 96. Fourth Uncle Lu left quickly and returned quickly as well. The fall on the doorstep seemed to have made him think things through. He climbed up and patted the dust off his body as if nothing had happened. He readily agreed. He had already thought it through. He was also willing to pay the 50% of the joining fee. Of course, how the other person secretly cursed seventh uncle for being a treacherous pig-like teammate was not something that Li Yi cared about. The candied Ha's business wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. Fong and the others had more important things to do, so they naturally couldn't spend all their time on this. They urgently lacked manpower. This was the first problem they had to face if they wanted to expand the candied Ha's business. The demand for the Liu family's candied Ha's in Qing and prefectural city was far from being saturated. There was still a lot of profit to be made. Of course, Li Yi couldn't just give this portion of the profit to the Liu family's direct descendants. It wasn't impossible for them to interfere, but if he didn't peel off a few layers of skin from them, how could he be worthy of the care these people had given the Liu sisters all these years? Son-in-law, do you really plan on letting them do the candied Ha's business? Fong walked in from outside and looked at Li Yi with a face full of confusion. For Fong, this was currently the only profitable business. Naturally, he wasn't willing to let the direct descendants take advantage of it for nothing. He had personally witnessed how these people treated the two ladies these past few years. Fong didn't even want to give them 10% of the profit, let alone 50%. You have to look at the long term. Just think of it as them making money for us. Li Yi could only think of another way to explain things to Fong, who only knew how to look at things in front of him. Although it wasn't easy for Fong's brain to work around things, his intelligence was still within the range of a normal person. After hearing Li Yi's explanation, he somewhat understood. Just letting them borrow the Liu family's candied Ha's name and they could get 50% of the profit for nothing. Thinking about it this way, it didn't seem like a loss. Thinking of this, Fong's face showed his signature silly smile. Looking at the silly smile on Fong's face, Li Yi couldn't help but think of the scene last night when this guy tricked him. He resisted the urge to take off his shoes and slap his face. He smiled and said, "Don't smile like an idiot. Come in, I have something to tell you." For some reason, Fong's heart trembled when he saw the smile on Li Yi's face. He suddenly had a bad premonition. After an hour, Fong walked out of the courtyard with a worried look on his face. He looked back at the house and let out a long sigh. The son-in-law actually handed the task of building a workshop to him and wanted it to be completed within 5 days. This was indeed his limit. After taking 2 steps, an angry shout came from behind him. "Yang Xiaojun, you mother of ***, stop right there." Turning his head, a huge fist came flying at him and smashed fiercely into his face. At the same time, Fong's furious voice came, "You be ****, I've wanted to beat you up for a long time." After being punched in the face, the man immediately felt dizzy and saw stars. He was also angered and returned a punch as he cursed, "Come on, I'm not afraid of you." Old Fong hadn't expected his opponent to fight back, and was caught off guard. The fist landed on his face, causing his eyes to swell like a panda's. Cursing angrily, he punched back and began to wrestle with the man. The two of them punched and kicked each other. After all, the man's physique was much inferior to Fong's. Although he was not suppressed and beaten, he was still the one at a disadvantage. After being kicked to the ground by Fong for an unknown number of times, he lay there panting and was unwilling to get up again. "The last time I beat you up so happily was probably more than 10 years ago, right?" Old Fong wiped the sweat off his forehead. Although his face was covered in bruises, there was a comfortable expression on his face. "Yes, it's been more than 10 years. The man looked up at the sky as a trace of reminiscence appeared on his face. The reminiscence flashed on Fong's face, and then he kicked the man and said coldly, "If you're not dead, come in with me." After a while, Fong stuffed a large bag of refined rice into the man's hand and scolded, "This food is for my nephew. It has nothing to do with you, Yang Xiaojun." "Fong, I..." The bag of rice seemed to be at least a dozen kilograms. A trace of emotion appeared on the man's face. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted by Fong with a wave of his hand. These days, the son-in-law is going to build a workshop. If you have nothing to do, come and work with me. You'll get 10 copper coins a day, and you'll eat your fill. Don't say that I, Fong, treat you badly. Fong punched him in the chest and said, and those bastards, if they're willing to come and work with me, let them come. Thank you. The man was stunned when he heard the words, and then his face showed ecstasy. He only said half a sentence, and Fong waved his hand and said, okay, go home quickly. Don't let your mother-in-law wait. If you're willing to work, come and find me after dinner. Son-in-law, I've found everyone. Li Yi was planning how the floral water workshop should be built in the room. Fong pushed the door and said at the top of his voice. So fast, hiss, you are. Li Yi raised his head and looked at Fong's bruised and swollen face. He took a breath and couldn't help but ask, did you really go to a brothel last night and was discovered by your mother-in-law today? Originally, he had only planned to rent a normal shop, but after winning against Shinzhao yesterday, he had gained 300 taels of liquid capital, so he had to change his plans. 300 taels of silver was enough to rent a shop with a good location in a bustling area. Originally, he planned to go down the mountain to rent a shop and renovate it over the next few days. Then, he would take out some Rui nectar to test the market. After the workshop was built, he would be able to mass-produce it. However, changes often came a little faster than planned. Many people in the village were eyeing the candied Ha's business. In the past, it was not easy for the direct descendants of the Liu family to ask for it. Of course, they also knew that even if they asked for it, Fong Lao-san and the others would not agree. However, the success of Fong Lao-san and Fong Lao-san made them widen their eyes. Just by handing over 2 land deeds, they could sell candied Ha's in the name of the Liu family. Although the joining fee of 50% made their hearts ache when they thought about it, as long as they could succeed in the candied Ha's business, even if they had to hand over 50% of the profits, they could still live a much better life than what they had now. No matter how they looked at it, it was a good deal. Land was the foundation of a family. Under normal circumstances, they would not easily hand over the land. However, how much food could the land produce in a year? Usually, it was fine, and the family could always eat their fill. If the harvest was bad one year, the whole family would have to tighten their waistbands to live. Looking at Fong Lao-san and the others, they had only been with Rui's son-in-law for a short time. What kind of life were they living now? How could the direct descendants feel at ease? As a result, in the past 2 days, Li Yi's house was almost trampled to the ground by these people. Land deeds, joining fee. They had already gotten the information they wanted from Fong Lao-san and Fong Lao-san. These people were very straightforward. They slapped the land deeds on the table one by one. Before Li Yi mentioned the joining fee, they took the initiative to make an agreement. 50% was 50%. Everyone would get 50%, and no one would lose out. From the beginning to the end, these uncles' attitudes were very humble. The smiles on their faces were as kind as they could be. After all, no one wanted to go against money. What kind of life they would lead in the future was completely up to Li Yi's decision. Lu Rui did not ask about what Li Yi had done. She only silently put away the land deeds that Li Yi had handed over to her. However, Xiao Huan's pretty face was full of smiles these days. After being bullied for a long time by those people, she was very happy to see them talking to the son-in-law with a smile. To be honest, Li Yi was not interested in the land. In this era, as long as one wanted money, it was a very simple thing to buy land. Moreover, the land here was not like the land in the future, where the right to use it was only for a few decades. Even if the dynasty changed and the dynasty changed, it would only recognize the deed and not the owner. If it was your land, it would be your land. In order to maintain stability, the ruler would not take back the land. As long as you had the land deed, you were still the owner of the land, and no one could take it away. The barren land of Willow Leaves Village was really not attractive to Li Yi. He just wanted to take back what should belong to them. The real reason why he asked the direct descendants of Luz to intervene in the business of candied haws was that Fang and the others should always leave some soup for others to drink. Under his wise leadership, Fang and the others would only get better and better in the future. Even if Fang wanted to live in a big house and marry a concubine, it was not impossible. There was no harm if there was no comparison. A few people were living a well-off life, but most people in the village were still hovering above the line of food and clothing. The gap between the rich and the poor was so big. If it went on like this, there would be trouble sooner or later. But now, such a hidden danger had been extinguished by Li Yi before it even had a chance to show itself. Of course, it only solved the problem of the direct descendants of Luz. After all, most of the people in the village were the former bandits like Fang and the others. Their lives were even more difficult. However, for these people, being able to fill the stomachs of their families was already the greatest satisfaction they could get. This request was not too high. Even if Li Yi did not mention it, old Fang and the others would also think of helping out on a daily basis, so there would not be any major problems. Their wages came from this fee, and the more customers they attracted, the more their commission would naturally be. If they met a generous person, as long as the customer was satisfied, they would naturally reward them with money. The young master in front of them looked extraordinary, so he must be a big customer. These middlemen had dealt with all kinds of people all year round, so they were quite good at judging people. Li Yi casually picked a smart-looking guy. The others couldn't help but show disappointment on their faces, but they could only retreat helplessly. "Young master, what do you need? Don't hesitate to tell me. I will definitely satisfy you." The waiter rubbed his hands together and said with a smile, "I need to rent a shop in the prefecture, a moderate size, preferably in a bustling area. How about the rent here?" Li Yi didn't beat around the bush and said straightforwardly. The waiter was obviously very familiar with this. He said without thinking, "If it's in an ordinary area, the rent of an ordinary shop is about 100 taels. If you want to rent a shop in a bustling area, I'm afraid it will cost at least 300 taels of silver." This price was not much different from what Li Yi had expected. However, 300 taels of silver was not a small number after all. After the shop was rented, it would definitely need to be renovated, which would cost at least dozens of taels of silver. In this way, there would not be enough money to buy the raw materials for making Rui Du. 300 taels of silver is a little expensive. Li Yi smiled, took out a piece of broken silver from his arms, and put it on the table in front of the waiter. The broken silver was at least 1 tael. Seeing this, the waiter's eyes suddenly lit up. He swept his sleeve across the table and the silver disappeared. When he looked at Li Yi again, the smile on his face became even more radiant. "Young master, you have found the right person this time. I just happen to know of a shop in a bustling area that is urgently for sale. The price is about 20% lower than the market price. If young master is interested, I will take you there immediately." Reality proved that money could make the devil turn millstones. This saying had been used since ancient times. Most things in the world could be solved with money. If it couldn't, then it meant that the money you gave was not enough. 1 tael of silver was enough to make the waiter's attitude become extremely enthusiastic. He immediately took Li Yi to see the shop. The location of the shop was not bad. It was on the main street of the Qing and prefecture. Outside was the busy street. The shop was about 3 feet long and 6 feet wide. It could be considered spacious. More importantly, there was a small courtyard and 2 rooms at the back of the shop. According to the waiter, the family that originally did business here moved to the capital after their business became big, and the shop was left empty. However, this shop was located in the bustling area of the prefecture. If it was left empty, it would be too much of a waste. Therefore, they asked the broker to rent it out for them. Because they left in a hurry, the rent was much lower. As for the courtyard and rooms at the back of the shop, they were also given to them for free. After looking at the shop and the courtyard behind it, Li Yi started to feel uneasy. To be able to rent such a place for less than 300 taels of silver, it was almost no different from a pie falling from the sky. He looked at the waiter with some suspicion and asked, "Tell me honestly, is there something wrong with this shop? Was there a murder case, or was there a ghost?" Hearing this, the waiter was stunned at first, and then he said with a bitter smile, "Young master, you have wronged me. Everything I said is true, without any concealment. If you don't believe me, you can ask around." At this moment, the waiter felt bitter in his heart. 1 tael of silver was almost equivalent to a month's salary. If it wasn't for the fact that this young master had been so generous, he definitely wouldn't have mentioned such a good thing so easily. Forget it, forget it." Li Yi waved his hand. If there was really a problem here, the broker would not take such a hot potato. Moreover, one should be upright and not suspect others for no reason. At this time, a stout fat man came out from the cloth shop next door. Seeing this, Li Yi hurried to go up. "May I know your name? Are you the shopkeeper of this cloth shop?" The fat man nodded and looked at Li Yi with doubt. "My surname is Su. What can I do for you?" "Shopkeeper Su has been here for a long time. Have you heard that the shop next door is haunted?" The waiter just walked out of the shop and heard this. He couldn't help but stagger and almost fell. Restaurants and brothels could be seen in just a few steps. Not far from the shops was a market square. People came and went, and it was very lively. Li Yi also noticed that there was a brothel next to the shop. To put it bluntly, it was a modern theater. In this era without mobile phones, television, movies, and the internet, scholars strolled around the brothel and recited poems. This was the most common form of entertainment. As for ordinary people, they could only listen to storytelling and plays. The brothel was the main performance venue for these entertainment programs. In the future, if he was bored, he could often go there to sit, drink a cup of tea, and listen to a few tunes to kill time. This was not a bad idea. Of course, the current him didn't have the leisure to do so. "Brother Lu, look, isn't that the person from that day?" When Li Yi passed by a brothel, 3 young men happened to walk out. One of them raised his head and looked at the figure in front of him. His expression was startled, then he immediately pointed at him and said to the person beside him, "Yes, Brother Lu, isn't that the person who insulted Fong Wen Tian and made Brother Lu lose face?" The person beside him looked in the direction he was pointing and exclaimed, "It's him." The man who was called Brother Lu looked at the young scholar who walked past them and his face couldn't help but turn gloomy. That day at the poetry meet, he had taken a liking to the other's servant girl. What could he do? The other was unwilling to exchange and completely disregarded him, the son of the county magistrate. Although with his vengeful personality, he would not let this matter go, there were so many people present that day. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't do anything. At the mid-autumn poetry meet, he heard that the person had written some good poems that even Shenjiao had to concede defeat. These days, the popularity of the person seemed to surpass Yang Yanzhou and become the #1 scholar in Qingham Prefecture. He had a grudge against him, so naturally, he was extremely unhappy. Later, although he had investigated him, he didn't find anything. He guessed that the other had no background and wanted revenge. Unfortunately, he couldn't find the person. After a few days, he had almost forgotten about this matter. Who would have thought that he would run into him here today? "Follow them." The youth surnamed Lu said coldly and quickly followed them. This was a rare opportunity. If he let the other escape this time, he didn't know when he would meet him again. Although the safest method was to find some people first, there was clearly no time for that. Furthermore, the other was only one person. They had 3 people and had the advantage in numbers, so they were not afraid of him. The 2 people beside him looked at each other. There was a trace of hesitation in their eyes, but they still followed. At the same time, Li Yi, who was walking on the street, suddenly frowned and his footsteps slowed down. It was not good to make a move in the busy streets. The 3 people quickly stopped and pretended to look around. A wastrel and 2 scholars. Their tracking skills were really clumsy, and their acting was terrible. No matter what, Li Yi had been taught by the 2 heroines. Very quickly, he felt that someone was following him. He turned his head to look. The exaggerated acting skills of the 3 people were especially eye-catching in the crowd. A trace of a smile appeared on his lips. His footsteps quickened and he walked forward with large strides. Seeing this, the 3 people hurriedly chased after him. This time, he didn't choose a place with many people. After a few turns, he walked into a deserted alley. When the youth surnamed Lu saw this, a trace of joy appeared on his face. He was worried about where to make a move. He didn't expect that the other party would take the initiative to walk to such a place. He gave the 2 people beside him a look and they nodded. Their figures suddenly rushed out and blocked in front of Li Yi. "What do you want?" Hearing the scholar's panicked voice, a trace of joy appeared on the youth surnamed Lu's face. He said, "What are you waiting for? Make a move. In broad daylight, you actually dare to hit people." The scholar's voice seemed to be even more panicked. The youth surnamed Lu walked to the front and sneered at Li Yi. He said, "So what if I hit you? Did anyone see it?" When the youth surnamed Lu said this, the 3 people saw the scholar's expression freeze for a moment. After looking around, a trace of a smile actually appeared on his face. Chapter 100. In broad daylight, deep alleyways with few people in sight, he looked at the 3 people surrounding him. Their faces were dark, their footsteps were unsteady, and their legs were unsteady. One look and he could tell that their bodies had been emptied by alcohol and women. He had the right time, the right place, and the right people. Moreover, no matter what, he was still the disciple of these 2 peerless heroines. As a young hero of the martial arts world, if he couldn't even deal with these 3 small fries, how would he have the face to learn martial arts from them in the future? He wouldn't even be able to dream of becoming a lowly martial artist in the martial arts world. If Lu Rui were to find out, he would laugh himself to death. You can still smile when you're at death's door. Seeing the smile on the scholar's face, the youth surnamed Lu felt insulted and rushed forward with his fist. Of course, he was only saying it casually. If someone really died, even if his father was the county magistrate of Anxi, he wouldn't be able to protect him. The 2 scholars beside him hesitated for a moment when they saw him making a move, but they still dashed forward as well. Although scholars weren't good at fighting, the county magistrate's son had already stepped forward. If they still stood here, they wouldn't have a good time afterward. The 3 people rushed over aggressively, but Li Yi wasn't afraid at all. Instead, his eyes flashed with excitement. Although he knew that his skills had improved a lot over the past few days, he had never really fought with anyone. Challenging Rui to spar was simply courting death. As for challenging Fang, that fellow didn't know how to control his strength. Li Yi wasn't at ease. At this moment, he finally had a chance to put his plan into practice. He dodged the youth surnamed Lu's punch and swung his elbow at the youth's back. Bam! The youth surnamed Lu didn't expect this scholar to be so agile. Caught off guard, he took a heavy blow to his back and staggered. Before he could turn his head, Li Yi had already kicked his buttocks. Thump! Although he didn't kick someone far away like Fang and the others, he still made him lose his balance and fall to the ground. At this moment, the two scholars had already rushed over. Li Yi turned his head and a smile appeared on his face. He faced them fearlessly. After a while, Don't come over. Including the youth surnamed Lu, the three with bruised and swollen faces looked at the scholar who was slowly walking towards them with a trembling voice. Li Yi rubbed his slightly aching fist. The effect of force was mutual. He was not like Lu Rui who had the protection of true qi. His fist was also aching after beating up these three guys. However, even though his fist was a little painful, his heart was filled with lofty sentiments as he looked at the three people in front of him. No wonder everyone said that he was a weak scholar. If the fighting strength of all the scholars in the world was so weak, then he alone could take on a group of them. The only troublesome thing was that the guy in the lead seemed to be the son of the county magistrate. It didn't seem good to beat him up. After all, Li Yi would probably have to stay in the prefecture for a long time in the future. It wasn't a wise thing to make enemies with this kind of person. However, since the enmity had already been formed, it was useless to regret it now. If there was no other way, he could only look for Li Xian and give him 2 poems to deceive little girls. Based on his character, he would probably agree immediately. Are you done fighting? Just as Li Yi was planning to do so, a faint voice came from behind him. The voice was crisp and pleasant to the ear. Li Yi turned his head and saw a woman leaning against the wall at the entrance of the alley. She was wearing the uniform of a constable and was looking at him with a teasing gaze. The woman was extremely beautiful with an exquisite figure and a valiant and heroic bearing. It was just that the uniform of a constable was a little out of place, causing Li Yi to feel a little uneasy. However, when he saw that it was only one person, and a woman at that, he finally felt relieved. I'm done fighting. Li Yi nodded and looked for an opportunity to escape. Since you're done fighting, follow me back to the yamen. The woman straightened her body and said calmly as she slowly walked toward him. Constable Li, hurry up and catch him. How dare you hit me? You're dead meat. The appearance of the woman caused the fear on the young man's face to disappear instantly. He immediately pointed at her and said. At this moment, the way he looked at Li Yi became ferocious again. Once they reached the yamen, it would be his territory. Although his father had explicitly forbidden him from using his identity as the son of the county magistrate to bully others, none of the constables dared to disrespect him. Once they reached the yamen, all he needed to do was say the word, and this guy would be in for a beating. The woman walked in front of the three and said calmly, the three of you, follow me back. What? The young man was stunned and asked in disbelief, you want to catch us too? Fighting in the street, why don't you catch us? Looking at her expressionless words, the young man was stunned for a moment. Then, his face was filled with grief and indignation. How did they fight? They were obviously being beaten. Didn't they see that they were the ones being beaten? Are you blind? Is there any law? Of course, he would not dare to ask such a question even if he was given 10 guts. After all, although the woman in front of him was only a constable in the yamen, which constable would talk to the county magistrate with caution? As early as the first day he came to the yamen, his father had repeatedly warned him that he could offend anyone in the yamen, except for this madam. If it were any other constable, he would have already scolded them. But at this moment, he could only endure the grievance in his heart. His eyes inadvertently glanced around and saw that the scholar who beat them just now was about to slip out of the alley. His expression immediately changed, and he pointed at him, he's running away. When the female constable turned around, she saw the figure of the scholar just now disappear from the alley. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly. After taking a big detour, Li Yi could not help but sigh in his heart when he reached the street again. The constables here were really competent. Every time something happened, they could arrive in time. If the efficiency of the police in the future was half as good as theirs, how harmonious and stable would society be? But fortunately, the constable just now was only a woman. Otherwise, he really would not be able to escape today. A woman should stay at home and do embroidery. Why did she come out to be a constable? Would she be able to get married in the future? Why don't you take a detour? Before Li Yi had time to think about whether the female constable would be able to get married or not, he suddenly heard a slightly familiar voice behind him. His face slightly stiffened, and the next moment, he broke into a run without hesitation. Whoosh! A beautiful figure fell from the sky and landed gracefully in front of him, blocking his way. Looking at the woman in front of him who was looking at him with a playful expression, Li Yi's face became a little bitter. I'm doomed. I didn't expect this female constable to be a master. Chapter 101. Walking on the wide main street of Qing and Prefecture once again, Li Yi's mood was completely different. The women in this world were not to be trifled with. This was the conclusion that Li Yi came to after living here for so long. Any random woman he met on the street could be a hidden heroine whose martial arts were frighteningly high. When that woman descended from the sky and blocked his way, Li Yi knew that he couldn't leave today. He regretted not bringing Fang with him today. Even if he came out with Lu Rui, he wouldn't end up like this. Luckily, he wasn't alone. The son of the county magistrate and the two young scholars were standing next to him, looking dejected. They would occasionally turn their heads to glare at Li Yi fiercely, but when they saw the beautiful constable, they would quickly turn their heads back. The county yamen wasn't a good place to be, especially when one was caught for fighting. Luckily, this female constable didn't even give face to the son of the county magistrate. She could be considered as impartial. Fighting could be big or small. At this level, it was at most disturbing the peace. A fine of a few taels of silver was the most they could do. However, if the county magistrate wanted to make things difficult for him because of his son, things would be a little difficult. At that time, he might really have to use the name of Prince Ning to stabilize the situation first. On the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, Li Xian once patted his chest and said that in this prefecture, if anyone encountered any problems, they could look for him. Li Yi didn't take it to heart at that time. Now that he thought about it, the little prince really had a crow's mouth. The female constable followed behind them. When her beautiful eyes swept across Li Yi's body, there would occasionally be a flash of surprise. The scholar in front of her looked gentle and weak, but judging from his movements, he seemed to have some foundation in martial arts. This wasn't common among scholars. Of course, this wasn't what puzzled her. Although it was rare for scholars to practice martial arts, it wasn't enough to surprise her. The reason why she paid more attention to the scholar was that she had never seen his martial arts style before. Because of her family background, she did not dare to say that she had read all the martial arts in the world, but her knowledge was extraordinary. Even if she could not name all the martial arts in Jianghu, she could still tell the way. However, the move that the scholar used just now was extremely strange. It was completely different from the various martial arts in Jianghu, but it was definitely not a random move. This made her a little curious. If Li Yi had known that the reason this female constable had brought him to the yamen was because she was curious about his martial arts, he would never have used Tai Chi to tease these three fellows. Naturally, the Taiji moves in the Library of Heaven's path had been simplified. They might be able to strengthen one's body, but it was impossible for one to become a Taiji expert. A few days ago, he practiced Tai Chi in the morning just for fun. However, ever since he taught Tai Chi to Lu Rui, she would occasionally dismantle the moves and add some variations to them. Then, she would give them back to Li Yi. This made this set of martial arts that was used by uncles and aunties in the later generations to have some offensive power. Tai Chi was a martial art that used the weak to defeat the strong, and used softness to overcome hardness. It required less strength, which was suitable for the current Li Yi. As for the improved moves, he didn't stop practicing them. Hey, Mingzu, where are you going? The female constable was pondering over the moves that the scholar used just now. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind her. The young and handsome man caught up from behind and asked her with a smile. The woman frowned and said, "Back to the yamen." She didn't hear anything for a long time. Seeing that the other party wasn't pestering her like before, she was puzzled. When she looked up, she found that the young man was staring straight ahead. A hint of surprise appeared on his face. He quickly walked to the scholar and said, "Why are you here? How do they know each other?" Seeing this scene, a hint of confusion appeared on the woman's pretty face. Li Yi had never felt like this before. The face of the young prince, Li Xian, was so amiable. "You know each other?" He pointed at the female constable and looked at Li Xian with anticipation. Yes, Li Xian looked at him and asked with some confusion, "When did you and my cousin know each other?" "Cousin." Li Yi was finally relieved. They were all from the old Li family, so the distance between them had been greatly shortened. However, since she was Li Xian's cousin, she was also from the royal family. But how could a member of the royal family be a constable? "Are you done? If you are, then follow me back to the yamen." The confusion on the female constable's face disappeared in a flash. Then, she resumed her indifferent expression. "Back to the yamen." Li Xian was stunned. He turned to look at her and asked, "What crime did he commit?" "It's a misunderstanding." "It's all a misunderstanding." As soon as Li Yi opened his mouth, the female constable waved her hand, "Don't talk nonsense. If you have anything to say, we can talk back to the yamen." Li Xian looked at her, then turned back to look at Li Yi. Whether it was because of their personal relationship or some other reason, he could not sit back and do nothing about what happened today. He quickly walked over and whispered a few words into the woman's ear. The female constable frowned at first, but after a while, her brows relaxed and she looked at Li Yi in surprise. Aunt's chronic illness was cured by the person in front of her. She did not want to make things difficult for him by bringing him back to the yamen. She could ignore Li Xian's reputation, but she still had to consider Uncle Wang's. As she pondered, there was a sudden commotion in the crowd in front of her. "This silver is mine." "Nonsense, it's obviously mine." The faint sound of two people arguing could be heard. Someone in the crowd glanced over and suddenly shouted, "There's a constable over there. Let the constable be the judge." Yes, let the constable be the judge. When they saw a person dressed in a constable's uniform, there was a commotion in the crowd and they immediately rushed over. A few men who had been following Li Xian from afar looked at each other and immediately walked over. They spread out around him and paid attention to any movements in their surroundings. "Lord Constable, you have to uphold justice for this lowly one." A man dressed in coarse cloth grabbed the arm of a scholarly man and walked over to the woman's side as he pleaded. "What exactly happened?" the female constable asked with a frown. "My lord, this lowly one was eating noodles at the noodle stall and accidentally dropped the silver on the ground. This person picked it up and when this lowly one discovered it, I asked him to return it. However, he insisted that the silver was his to begin with." The man looked anxious. "My mother is seriously ill, and this is money for her to buy medicine to save her life. We can't lose it." "What a load of nonsense." The scholarly man glanced at the man and said, "This silver is clearly mine. Don't you dare try to extort me, you scoundrel." After the two of them spoke, the surrounding crowd chimed in one after another. Some agreed with the man, while others stood on the scholarly man's side. The woman rubbed the space between her brows as she listened to the crowd's chatter. She couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. She didn't know which of the two men was telling the truth, but this matter was really hard to determine. Catching a thief was more like it, but solving a case wasn't something she was good at. "Miss, why don't we make a deal?" At that moment, a weak voice was heard from beside her. Chapter 102. A deal? Mingzu turned her head and looked at the scholar with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She said lightly, "What kind of deal?" "I'll help you solve the case in front of you, and you let me go. Then we're even." Li Yi looked at her and said. Li Xian pulled his sleeve and whispered, "Do you really know who this silver belongs to?" He knew his cousin's character very well. It would be fine if Li Yi didn't say anything. If he found out that he had fooled her in the end, it would not be easy to solve today's matter. Li Yi gave him a reassuring look, and Li Xian didn't speak anymore. Although he didn't know how to judge who this silver belonged to, since he knew Li Yi, everything he did was unexpected. He didn't know what method Li Yi had thought of at this moment, and he began to look forward to it. "What do you have in mind?" Li Mingzhu's face showed an expression of interest. Usually, there was no other way to deal with this kind of ambiguous dispute in the county government. After a few floggings, they would confess. There was no need to be so troublesome. She wanted to see what the scholar could do. "It's very simple. Since we can't tell who this silver belongs to, we can just split it in half. Everyone will be happy." Li Yi took out 2 pieces of silver from his bosom, each about half a tael. He snatched the silver from the Confucian scholar's hand and stuffed them into the bosom of the burly man and the Confucian scholar. Seeing this scene, the young prince, Li Xian, couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. This method was really simple and crude. But, could his cousin pass it? Sure enough, when he turned his head and peeped, he found that the scholar's face became a little ugly. The young man surnamed Liu and the other 2 stood aside and watched the scene. Seeing this, they almost couldn't help laughing. If everything could be solved in this way, why did they need the county magistrate? Isn't this a mess? What kind of method is this? This scholar is just messing around. How can he solve a case like this? Seeing this, the onlookers immediately became noisy, one after another, talking at the same time. "Sir, you mustn't do that. If I lose half of the money, I won't be able to buy my mother's medicine." The burly man's face immediately revealed a pleading expression as he looked at Mingzu and said, "This young master's words are reasonable. A scholar should have a magnanimous heart. I won't argue with a scoundrel like you. How about I give you half of the silver?" When the Confucian scholar heard this, a trace of joy appeared on his face and he immediately said, "Is this the solution you mentioned?" Mingzu turned to look at Li Yi, a dangerous glint flashed in her eyes. "Of course, not." Li Yi smiled, looked at her, and said calmly, "There is only one truth." He suddenly turned around and pointed his finger at the Confucian scholar, shouting, "Murderer! Bah! He's the one who lied." The situation changed so quickly that no one in the crowd could react. While the Confucian scholar was still in a daze, Li Yi had already snatched the silver fragment from his hand and stuffed it into the burly man's arms along with the silver ingot. "Be careful next time. Take these 2 silver fragments as well. Buy your mother's medicine quickly." Li Yi was not a generous person, but if the burly man had not lost the silver, he might have been taken to the county government by the female arrestor. It was rare for her to be generous to him. What's going on? The young prince, Li Xian, was confused and still in a daze. The onlookers also started to ask questions. Why are you so sure that he's the one who lied? I can't figure it out. Everyone looked at Li Yi, waiting for his explanation. Mingzhu's pretty face showed a trace of doubt and some realization. She also turned to look at him. Nonsense. Why are you so sure that I'm the one who lied? The Confucian scholar's face showed a trace of panic, but it was soon replaced by grief and indignation. He looked at Li Yi as if he was really wronged. Because the silver originally belonged to this burly man, so of course he didn't want to give half of it to others for no reason. Li Yi smiled and pointed at the Confucian scholar, saying, "And he, because the silver didn't belong to him, he could get half of it for no reason. Of course, he agreed so readily. Hearing his explanation, Li Xian's face showed a look of realization. He looked at him in surprise. How did he come up with such an ingenious way to solve the case? And the pretty Emmingsen next to Li Yi also looked at him differently for the first time. After hearing Li Yi's words, the crowd was stunned for a moment, then they immediately burst into an uproar. This young master's words make sense. Brilliant, really brilliant. I was almost cheated by this guy just now. I almost wronged this burly man. In an instant, the way everyone looked at Li Yi changed. Their gazes were filled with respect and admiration. When they turned to look at the Confucian scholar, their faces were filled with disdain. What a disgrace to a scholar. As a scholar, how could he do such a despicable thing? He even cheated his mother of money to save her life. Is he still human? Take him to the magistrate. At this moment, the Confucian scholar's face finally showed panic. When he raised his head to look at Li Yi, his heart was filled with grief and indignation. Trap, it was all a trap. So the other party had set a trap for him from the beginning, waiting for him to fall into it. But at this moment, he naturally couldn't admit it. With a wronged expression, he said loudly, "This is just your deduction. I didn't expect that my momentary kindness would be taken advantage of by a villain. I'm not convinced. I want to go to the county government, I want to see the county magistrate." Not convinced. Li Yi narrowed his eyes. Are you really not convinced? I'm not convinced. The Confucian scholar raised his head and looked at him with a trace of resentment in his eyes. Smack. Li Yi slapped his head. Are you convinced? The Confucian scholar didn't expect that this scholar would dare to hit him on the street. He was stunned. When he came to his senses, he pointed at him with a trembling finger. You, how dare you hit me? So what if I hit you? Li Yi frowned and slapped him again. Are you convinced? No. Are you convinced? Ouch. I'm not convinced even if you beat me to death. Seeing Li Yi slap the Confucian scholar's head again, the crowd was stunned on the spot. The corner of young Prince Li Xian's mouth twitched again. As for the young man with the surname Liu and the other two, they seemed to have thought of something bad, and their faces all darkened. On the other hand, the female constable crossed her arms and looked at the scene with interest. She didn't seem to want to stop it at all. Are you convinced? After countless slaps, even his hands were a little numb. The Confucian scholar finally couldn't take it anymore. Stop hitting me. I'm convinced, I'm convinced. I picked up the silver on the street. At this moment, the Confucian scholar only felt that his head was getting bigger and he was dizzy. With tears in his eyes, he said, I lost all my money in the gambling house this morning. When I passed by that man, I saw the silver fall from his arms, so I got the idea. Please, please stop hitting me. Seeing that the Confucian scholar finally admitted it, Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief and withdrew his hand. He straightened his body and looked at the female constable with a smile. Look, he admitted it. Chapter 103. Thank you, young master. Thank you for upholding justice for me. The man held the silver in his hand and bowed to Li Yi with a flushed face. When Li Yi proposed to split the silver, the man was still complaining about him. Now that he knew it was all part of Li Yi's plan, he felt very guilty. This young master was helping him, but he doubted him just now. He shouldn't have. Li Yi smiled at the man and turned to the female constable. He cupped his hands and said, the case has been solved. I'll take my leave now. Just as he was about to walk out of the crowd, he saw the woman suddenly reach out to grab him. Li Yi was startled. His feet curved in an arc. Just as the woman's hand was about to grab him, he used a push hand, causing her wrist to turn at an angle. Naturally, this grab missed. After personally experiencing this strange martial art, a look of astonishment appeared on the woman's face once again. You didn't keep your promise. Li Yi took the opportunity to take a step back and pointed at her angrily. When did I say that I would let you go? The woman looked at him and said indifferently. Just now, you. Li Yi only said a few words before he said nothing else. After thinking for a while, he realized that she really didn't say that. Boss, what happened? A few constables ran over from afar. When they saw the county magistrate's son standing there with a swollen face, they were shocked and turned to ask the woman. Bring them back to the yamen. The female constable pointed at the young man with the surname Liu and the other two. Then, she pointed at the Confucian scholar who was still standing at the side with his hands on his head. Immediately, the constables restrained them. Young master, I'm sorry. A constable walked to the young man with the surname Liu and said in a low voice. He put his hand on the young man's shoulder symbolically. Compared to the county magistrate's son, he was obviously more unwilling to provoke the female constable. Seeing that she didn't point at Li Yi, the young man with the surname Liu widened his eyes and said with great grief and indignation, Where is he? The female constable ignored him and said indifferently, Take him away. Yes. Although the constables didn't know what happened, they still responded respectfully and escorted the few people to the yamen. This is not fair. You're condoning and shielding. Is there still any law? The voice of the youth surnamed Liu gradually faded away. The female constable glanced at Li Yi but didn't say anything else. She turned around and left in a carefree manner. He turned around and said to Li Xian, Thank you very much for what you did today. Seeing that the powerful woman had left, Li Yi finally let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and cupped his hands towards Li Xian. He was a little impulsive today. If he hadn't met Li Xian, he would have been in trouble. Darn it. Li Xian smiled and suddenly said, However, if you feel that you owe me a favor and feel bad about it, why don't you give me a few poems? Li 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 Yu Xian Li Li King Yu Li 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 of. Li Li Xian said. Li Li Xian Li, but if you feel bad about owing me a favor, why don't you give me a few poems? Li Xian shook his head. Li Yi was stunned. What do you mean by the Jing Kingdom's #1 scholar? The young prince, Li Xian, looked around. Seeing that the crowd hadn't dispersed, he said, This isn't a good place to talk. Let's find a quiet place and talk while we drink. Hearing Li Xian's words, the expressions of the people scattered around him changed. After a while, in a restaurant in Qing Prefecture, in a private room, Li Xian looked at Li Yi in surprise and asked, You really don't know? Li Yi drank a cup of tea to moisten his throat and replied, I really don't know. He really didn't know when he became the #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom that Li Xian mentioned. That, Immortal of the Magpie Bridge, was it really written by you? Li Xian asked again. Brother Xiaoyu, please forgive me, please forgive me. Li Yi prayed in his heart and nodded shamelessly. You really can't judge a book by its cover. I didn't think that your literary talent would be so high. Li Xian looked at him with a different expression. Although the title of Jing Kingdom's #1 scholar was only known in Qing Prefecture and hadn't been recognized by all the scholars in the world, to be able to make those old men act like this, it was already extremely impressive. After all, even though he was a young prince, he had only received the evaluation of rotten wood cannot be carved from them. Thinking about how this fellow could receive such an evaluation from those arrogant old men, he couldn't help but feel a little indignant. So what if I'm rotten wood? Did I beg you to carve me? You're really crazy. Of course, these words could only be said in his heart and he absolutely didn't dare to say it out loud. What do you mean by you can't judge a book by its cover? Li Yi looked at Li Xian with a strange expression. Did he even know how to converse? Moreover, although he missed that face that he had seen for 20 years, he had to admit that in terms of appearance, the current one was still a little better. Even if it was Li Xian himself, he wouldn't dare to say that he was more handsome than him, right? Among the women who invited you that day, there were famous courtesans from Qing and Prefecture, Mingzu from the rich and powerful families, and even the daughter of the prefectural magistrate. After that night, who knows how many famous courtesans from the brothel said that they were willing to sleep with you. As he spoke, the young Prince Li Xian's face was full of envy. Li Yi's expression was a little dazed. Did this mean that if he went to sleep with him, he wouldn't have to pay if he went to the brothels in the future? He looked up at the opposite side and got a positive answer from Li Xian's face. In that case, he didn't have to work hard to sell candied haws, floral water, and so on. Now, he could sell autographs and portraits to make money. If a poem was written on the portrait, the price might even be doubled. This was a business that was almost guaranteed to be profitable. As he thought of this, the scene of being surrounded by women that day suddenly appeared in his mind. The expression on Li Yi's face froze, and he immediately dispelled this idea. One shouldn't be too ambitious. It was better to do business down to earth and be a quiet and handsome man. Tell me, when will my cousin treat me like those women treat you? How good would that be? Li Xian seemed to have triggered something in his heart. He showed a look of longing and muttered to himself. Li Yi suddenly looked up at him and couldn't believe his ears. Cousin. That female constable just now. Li Xian, this guy, actually likes his cousin. At this moment, his mind had automatically filled in the scenes of a vigorous moral drama. When he looked at him again, the expression in Li Yi's eyes changed for the first time. It was as if he was looking at a beast. An ill-fated relationship. Chapter 104. A cousin marrying a younger cousin and a younger cousin marrying a younger cousin. If this had happened in the future, not only would the law not allow it, but even if they had such an idea, they would still have their legs broken by the parents of the two parties. But in today's era, it was a very normal thing. The saying, cousin and younger cousin are a match made in heaven, had existed since ancient times. The ancients, who did not have the concept of genes and heredity, thought this was adding family to family. Thus, such a twisted complex was created. After thinking through this matter, the strange look in Li Yi's eyes slowly disappeared. He let out a long sigh. Child, the fault is not on you, the fault is on this world. However, it seemed that in the ancient times of his original world, cousins could marry, but cousins could not. Although the people of that era were still lacking in scientific knowledge, the concept of ethics and morality was more profound than that of the later generations. Cousins were considered to be very closely related by blood, so they were definitely not allowed to get married. If anyone dared to have any ideas about their cousin, they would still have their legs broken. Could it be that the people of this world did not have such an understanding? When he became more familiar with Li Xian, he wanted to find a chance to remind him. If the two of them really did get married in the future and gave birth to an idiot or a child with some kind of birth defect, Li Yi would really feel apologetic. That's right, where do you live? Why can't so many people in Qing and Fu find you? Even the daughter of Magistrate Dong couldn't find you after using the power of the government. Li Xian looked at him and suddenly remembered something. He had been puzzled about this matter for a long time. That time, when he cured his mother's depression, Ning Wang Fu had also sent people to search for him, but to no avail. There were quite a few people named Li Yi in the records of the government, but after investigating them one by one, they found that none of them were the person they were looking for. There was one person whose age and identity matched, but when they sent people to ask, they found that the scholar named Li Yi had lost his mind not long ago. After running out of the village, he had never returned. The villagers searched everywhere but to no avail. They had already reported him to the government and listed him as a missing person. Losing his mind, naturally, it wouldn't be him. He lives in a remote area outside the city. It's normal that he can't find him, Li Yi replied. Li Xian seemed to think of something and said, in a few days, it will be my mother's birthday. You should come with us. Last time you cured my mother's illness, the whole mansion has not properly thanked you. The people who would attend Wang Fei's birthday would definitely be people of status in Qing and prefectural city. Why would he go? You are the true expert in this field. I should have known that you would be able to conquer such a beautiful wife's younger sister. Admirable, admirable. Li Yi's expression darkened again. He felt that he could no longer continue the conversation with this fellow. After the conversation, Li Xian was no longer concerned about how many poems Li Yi should give him in return for his kindness. He turned his attention to something else. Before they parted, he once again reminded Li Yi that the next time they met, they must have a good conversation. What was the matter with the psychology of women and 36 ways to woo a woman that Li Yi had mentioned? The address that Li Yi left behind was not the Willow Leaf Stockade. At that time, the shops in the prefectural city would probably be open for business. He could go there directly to find him. As for the fact that Li Yi had opened a shop in Qing and prefecture, Li Xian was still somewhat surprised. Scholars, farmers, merchants had low status. Generally speaking, scholars were disdainful of doing business, thinking that it would lower their status. Many high officials and nobles were like Ning Wangfu. Although they also had business outside, they would never stand in the open and cooperate with those merchants. They would leave the public matters to them. However, he knew Li Yi's way of doing things. He had never been able to figure out Li Yi's way of doing things. He didn't seem like an orthodox scholar at all. If not for that, Li Xian might not have been interested in him in the first place. Of course, as for the Rui Du that he had never heard of, Li Xian also had a strong curiosity in his heart. That strange painting and sugar-coated hawes, the things that he made were always unusual. He didn't know what the Rui Du was. When the time came, he must see it. Chapter 105. The shop in the prefectural city was about to open, and Li Yi planned to be the boss himself. After all, although the village was quiet and peaceful, it was perfect for retirement. However, he had not saved enough for retirement yet, so he had to work hard for a few more days. Of course, living in the village for too long would be boring. The prefectural city was bustling, and it was far more interesting than staying here. However, this reason was not as important as the previous one. As such, he naturally had to put aside the matter of the school. With his current influence in the village, he could already make decisions for such a small matter. Most of the direct descendants of the Liu family relied on him to make money, so they naturally had no objections. Miss Qin, I'll have to trouble you to take care of these children in the future, said Li Yi as he cupped his hands and bowed to a seemingly weak young girl at the entrance of the school. The young girl's surname was Qin, and her first name was Qing. She looked a little delicate, and her body exuded a faint scholarly aura. Qing's grandfather was Mr. Qin. Before Li Yi came here, he was the one who taught in the school. However, he accidentally fell and injured his leg a few days ago, so he would probably have to stay in bed for the rest of his life. After Li Yi left, the school still had to continue. In the future, the young girl in front of him would take over his position. She had been by Mr. Qin's side since she was young, so she could read and write. She could be considered one of the few cultured people in the village. Of course, there were still many people in the village who had doubts about how a woman could become a teacher. However, they had no say in this matter. Ever since they were able to establish a business relationship with Li Yi, they could not wait to build a good relationship with him. Perhaps one day when he was in a good mood, they could even waive some of the joining fees. Naturally, they would not oppose him on such a small matter. Brother-in-law, can I really become a teacher? The naughty children in the school did not see the two of them and were still playing around inside. The young girl glanced into the room, and a hint of hesitation appeared on her pretty face as she asked timidly. When Li Yi asked for her opinion, the young girl hesitated for a long time before agreeing. Firstly, it was because she really liked these things in her heart. Previously, when her grandfather was a teacher in the school, she often looked forward to when she could stand in that position. However, it was just a thought. After all, in this world, women could not do things as freely as men. Another reason was that they had received too much kindness from Li Yi in the past few days. It was impossible for her to refuse such a small matter. Their father passed away when they were young, and there were only their mother, daughter, and their elderly grandfather at home. Although life was hard before, they could still get by. However, after their grandfather accidentally broke his leg, life became more and more difficult. If it wasn't for Xiao Huan who often brought him rice and noodles, he would have died a long time ago. Therefore, the girl's family was extremely grateful to them. Don't worry. It's just teaching them a few words every day. It's not that difficult. Li Yi smiled. Out of habit, he wanted to reach out and pat her on the shoulder to show his encouragement. Halfway through, he realized that it was not appropriate. He retracted his hand and pointed to the inside of the school. Let's go in. Hearing this, the young girl nodded and followed behind Li Yi. After the two of them walked into the school, the originally unusually noisy naughty children immediately quieted down and obediently returned to their seats. Seeing that there was a beautiful older sister next to the teacher today, the naughty children's eyes immediately sized her up. Most of them knew that this older sister seemed to be Mr. Qin's family, but they didn't know why this older sister came with the teacher today. Today, we won't be in class. Last time, we talked about the story of Ho Yi shooting the sun. Today, we will talk about Kwa Fu chasing the sun, Chang Yi flying to the moon, Jing Wei filling the sea. Qin Qing took the initiative to sit on the side. Li Yi's gaze swept across the school as he spoke. With this sentence, the naughty children's attention immediately shifted away from the young girl. Their faces revealed extreme excitement. In the past, as long as they performed well in class, the teacher would tell them a story after class. From those stories, they learned that heaven and earth used to be connected. There was a giant called Pangu who used an axe to split heaven and earth. The earliest people were molded from mud by goddess Nuwa. There used to be 10 suns in the sky, and a master archer called Hoi shot down 9 of them with his bow. These stories were like the monkey with the stick, deeply attracting the naughty children. Today, the teacher was actually going to tell so many stories. To these naughty children, it was undoubtedly more joyous than the new year. When the young girl called Qin Qing heard the slow and magnetic voice, she turned her head and saw the naughty children's small faces that were focused on the story. Her heart seemed to be touched by something. These half-grown children were extremely mischievous and ran amok in the village. Who knew how much trouble they had caused her? At that moment, when she saw those innocent and extremely clear eyes, a seed was quietly planted in her heart. For the sake of her being his sister-in-law, he had already given her a lot of face by naming the floral water in this world as ruis do. This time, he was determined not to give in. Rui Fong. Fong muttered the name, shook his head and said, "This name is not very good. We are doing serious business." Rui Fong, Rui Fong. It sounds like a new brothel in the prefecture. Li Yi was keenly aware that as Fong spoke, the surrounding atmosphere suddenly became subtle. Clang, this was the sound of a sword being unsheathed. Feeling the 2 cold eyes behind him, Fong couldn't help but shiver, and cold sweat rolled down his forehead. It was only at this moment that he realized why he had a bad feeling when he spoke just now. He straightened his chest, and his expression became solemn. He looked at Li Yi seriously and said, "Young master, I suddenly feel that the name Rui Fong is very good. Since we are selling Rui's dew, the name of the store should naturally match it. I think there is no more suitable name than Rui Fong." Li Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart as he looked at the righteous Lao Fong. How did that resolute man from back then turn into such a person? "I also think that it's better to call it Rui Fong," Lu Rui said with a smile. Although the name of the store was ultimately up to Li Yi, the public opinion was obviously on Lu Rui's side. Li Yi couldn't be arbitrary. He looked up at them and said, "Are you really not going to consider Six Spirits Lane?" In order to fully promote democracy, the name of the store was decided. On the same day, he and Fong ordered a signboard in the prefecture city. In order to further enhance the store's prestige, Li Yi found all of Wang Shiji's calligraphy in the library. After digesting them, he found the 3 words Ru, Yi, and Fong, and wrote them out personally. Of course, even if he had such a heaven-defying cheating device, he only needed to copy it. He wouldn't be able to reach Wang Shiji's level, but being able to copy 80 to 90% of it was enough to shock many people. At least, the shopkeeper who made the signboard was shocked by the elegant semi-cursive script. He had been running this ancestral shop for several decades and had made countless plaques. He had seen many authentic works of famous masters. Under the influence of what he had seen and heard, even though the shopkeeper's calligraphy skills were not very profound, few people could compare to him in terms of his ability to appreciate calligraphy. It was just 3 words, but it was enough to show that the calligraphy skills of the person who wrote it were profound. Without decades of practice, it would be impossible to achieve this. This level of skill could probably be compared with several calligraphy masters in the world. However, which one of those people didn't have decades of accumulation in order to achieve what they had today? If the scholar hadn't written in front of him, he definitely wouldn't believe that such wonderful calligraphy could be written by such a young man. Li Yi wasn't surprised by the shopkeeper's shocked expression. That was the sage of calligraphy, Wang Shiji, who had influenced Chinese calligraphy for more than 2,000 years. How could his calligraphy be ordinary? Of course, Li Yi was still very happy that the shopkeeper insisted on not taking his money. Now was the time for his career to start, so he should save as much as possible. The sage of calligraphy really deserved his reputation. Looking at the shopkeeper holding the piece of paper as if it was a treasure, Li Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The opening of the new store was supposed to do some publicity and marketing, but Li Yi wasn't in a hurry to do that. He still had some confidence in Rui Lu. However, this confidence was shaken on the first day of the store's opening. After half a day, not even a bottle of Rui Lu was sold. A few people entered the store to take a look, but when they heard that such a small bottle of Rui Lu was sold for 1 tael of silver, they immediately left as if they were escaping before Li Yi introduced the function of Rui Lu. Could it be that I set the price too high? After half a day, even Li Yi began to doubt it. 1 tael of silver was not a small amount for most people in the prefecture. Although they could afford it, they wouldn't be so extravagant as to buy such a bottle of something they didn't know the function of. Where are the local tycoons? Li Yi sat behind the counter and saw that there were only him and the young maidservant in the entire store. He couldn't help but start to call out in his heart. The young maidservant sat by the table with one hand supporting her chin. She looked out of the door and watched the passers-by with boredom. At a certain moment, 2 figures stopped in front of the door for a moment and then walked in. The young maidservant came back to her senses and immediately stood up from the chair and ran over. "Ladies, welcome to Rui Workshop." She bowed and said with a clear voice. Chapter 107. Welcome. It was obvious that this was the first time the 2 young ladies had heard this greeting. Their expressions froze and a trace of astonishment appeared on their pretty faces. In a world that was filled with, "Please come in, what would you like to eat, what would you like to order, and what would you like to order," the words, "welcome," from a pretty servant girl in a shop that they didn't know what it was selling was extremely refreshing and refined. The servant girl's attitude made them feel very comfortable. Just as they walked into the shop, their moods strangely became better. When they passed by the street earlier, they discovered that there was a new shop called Rui Square. They couldn't tell what it was selling from the shop's name, but the 3 words on the shop signboard seemed to have the demeanor of a great family. It was very extraordinary, and compared to the other shops along the street, it was like a crane among a flock of chickens. This made the 2 ladies a little curious, and they couldn't help but walk in. However, this extraordinary servant girl was only secondary. When the 2 ladies raised their heads and looked into the shop, their delicate bodies couldn't help but tremble. One of the ladies even covered her small mouth and almost cried out. They saw that there were many paintings hanging on the walls of the shop. What was strange was that in these paintings, whether it was the mountains, rivers, or people, they all looked like they were about to break out of the paintings. At first glance, even a normal person would be shocked. First, it was the elegant calligraphy. Now, it was the extremely strange paintings. This caused the 2 ladies' curiosity towards this shop to increase greatly. "2 misses, please sit." The servant girl's voice was gentle. The 2 ladies walked to the side of the table and chairs. No matter whether it was the floor or the chairs, they were all spotless. The moment they sat down, the servant girl had already brewed fragrant tea and stood quietly to the side. After walking into the shop, no matter if it was the environment or the servant girl's attitude, they all felt that it was just right. They didn't feel cold or annoyed. It was quiet and comfortable. There seemed to be a unique fragrance in the air that made people feel relaxed and happy. Following the scent, the 2 ladies' gazes quickly focused on a porcelain bottle on the table. "What is this?" Confusion appeared in the eyes of the 2 women as they looked at the servant girl. "This item is called a Rui Dew. It's our shop's newest product. It has the effect of cooling, refreshing, repelling mosquitoes, and relieving itching." A voice came from behind. The 2 girls turned around and saw a handsome young man walking out from behind the counter. He looked at them and said with a smile. The woman's expression froze when she heard this, as if she did not dare to believe it. This kind of strange thing was actually only selling for 1 tael of silver. Even a piece of jewelry that she usually wore would cost dozens to hundreds of taels. 1 tael of silver, to her, was really nothing. Seeing the shocked expression on her face, Li thought that she was scared by the price. After thinking for a moment, he clenched his teeth and said, "Miss, you are the first customer since the opening of this shop. You can enjoy a half-price discount. You only need 5 taels of silver to take away a bottle of Rui Dew." The woman returned to her senses and said with a smile, "1 tael of silver is 1 tael of silver. If this thing is useless, I will come find you again tomorrow." The woman in front of him was obviously a fair, rich, and beautiful woman with strong principles. No matter what, she was not willing to pay half price. She took out 1 tael of silver from her purse and asked Li again for instructions on how to use it. Then, she left the shop with the Rui Dew. After walking out of the shop, her close friend, who had been by her side and had not spoken, looked back into the shop. She turned her head and looked at her with a smile that was not a smile. She whispered, "What do you mean come find me tomorrow? Could it be that Archin family's young lady has taken a fancy to that young man?" A trace of red appeared on the woman's pretty face. She glared at her friend. "You little girl, don't talk nonsense. If this Rui Dew doesn't have the effect that he said, I will naturally ask him for an explanation." "An explanation?" The woman beside her heard this and laughed mockingly. "I think it's more like asking for a husband. You damned girl, if you dare to talk nonsense again, see if I don't tear your mouth apart." I don't dare, I will teach you a lesson when we get back." The two figures gradually disappeared from the street. Inside the shop, Li Yi put away the tael of silver and let out a long sigh of relief. No matter what, this first bottle of Rui Du was finally sold. Chapter 108. Reality was always crueler than ideal. After a whole day, he only sold 2 bottles of Rui Du. If it wasn't for Li Yi decisively giving a 50% discount when he saw that the young woman who entered the shop later was tempted but was obviously hesitant about the price, he would only be able to make 1 sale today. This time, the god of luck didn't seem to be on his side. In both of his lives, he didn't do much business. He had read a lot of books on marketing, but when it came to real use, he still couldn't figure it out. In the afternoon, he thought of a problem. There were only 3 words, Rui Workshop, hanging there. People didn't know what this shop was doing. So, he found a wooden board and erected it at the door. He clearly marked the effects and price of Rui Du. After that, more people came into the shop. But when they heard that it would cost 1 tael of silver to buy such a small bottle of mosquito-repellent medicine, they immediately lost interest. For most of the ordinary people in the city, if they were bitten by mosquitoes, they would just spit and wipe it. 1 tael of silver could buy a lot of food. Wasn't it crazy to spend it on this? But there were a few people who asked Li Yi if he would sell the board at the door. It seemed that he admired the calligraphy on it and even offered a price of 10 taels of silver. Of course, Li Yi didn't agree. Could it be that he could only rely on his talent to make a living? After a while, when he went out to take a look, the board was actually gone. After a while, he could only curse at the damn thief. Tomorrow, he would have to find a new board and nail it on the door. Inside the shop, the young servant girl held her chin with one hand and looked at the people coming and going outside. After a long time, a strange sound came from her stomach. Her pretty face slightly blushed. She turned her head to look at Li Yi and said softly, "Young master, I'm hungry." He hadn't eaten since morning. Even Li Yi felt a little hungry. He rubbed the young servant girl's head and said, "Okay, let's go out to eat first." Although the room at the back of the shop had been tidied up and there was a small kitchen, Li Yi was not in the mood to cook for himself. He closed the shop door and ate his stomach with Xiao Huan at the noodle stall outside. Originally, he wanted to take the little maidservant to a high-class restaurant to eat something good, but the little maidservant was still thinking about the noodle stall on the street. In the end, the two of them only spent a few copper coins. After the meal, he didn't go back to the shop. There were some things that Li Yi had to think about at home. Every profession had its own unique way of doing things. Previously, he had taken it for granted. In the willow leaf stockade, while Li Yi was lying on his bed, digesting more books on business theory and sales knowledge, in a courtyard with high walls in Qing and Prefecture, a charming young woman walked to the door of a room after taking a bath with a bowl of ginseng soup she had personally cooked. "Second madam." The two servants at the door greeted respectfully. "Is master asleep?" the woman asked softly. "No, master hasn't come back yet. He just sent someone to send in a new batch of official documents. They are still in the study," one of the servants replied in a low voice. The woman nodded, took the ginseng soup and walked in a certain direction. In the study, the middle-aged man finished reading a file. He closed his eyes and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. There was a trace of exhaustion between his eyebrows. After a moment, he opened his eyes again and took another document. Before he opened it, the door of the study was pushed open. Hearing the sound, the middle-aged man frowned. What he hated the most when he was working was to be disturbed. If the servants didn't get his orders, they wouldn't dare to come in at this time. After reading the documents for a whole night, he felt dizzy and annoyed. He was about to scold them, but when he looked up and saw the person coming, his expression eased. "Madam, why aren't you resting?" He put down the document in his hand, walked over, took the tray from her hand, put it on the table, and said softly. His first wife died when he was young, so this was the only concubine left in the family. Normally, he was busy with official business, so this second madam always took care of everything in an orderly manner. She never caused him any trouble, so she could be considered a good wife. Master, you are busy with official business, but you still need to take care of your health. I made some ginseng soup for Master. Master, drink it while it's hot. It won't be too late to read the documents later. The woman helped him straighten his collar and said with a smile. Thank you for your hard work, madam. The middle-aged man held her hand and patted it. When he smelled the strange smell coming from her body, he couldn't help but feel shocked, but he didn't care. He drank a bowl of ginseng soup and said, I still need some time to finish reading these documents. Madam, go rest first. The woman smiled and said, I'm not tired. I'll stay here with Master. The middle-aged man didn't say anything else. He picked up the document on the table again and began to seriously read it. The woman slowly walked to his back, stretched out her lily-white hands, and slowly massaged his shoulders. From time to time, he smelled a faint fragrance. The middle-aged man felt his spirit gradually rise, and the trace of tiredness from before was swept away. He couldn't help but speed up as he flipped through the documents. When he reached out his hand again, there were no more documents to take. The night watchman's voice came from outside the study. Only then did he discover that the document that usually took him 2 hours to read had actually taken him less than an hour. When he turned his head, he found that the woman had fallen asleep on the desk at some point in time. Quietly looking at her slightly tired brows, the middle-aged man's heart suddenly surged with a faint trace of guilt. Wasn't he neglecting her a little by devoting himself to his official duties? He took a thin blanket from the bed in the study and was about to cover her when the woman slowly opened her eyes. She got up and looked at him. She asked, Master, have you finished reading the document? Madam, it's been hard on you all these years. The middle-aged man held her hand and sighed. He pulled her into his arms. Master. She had never seen such a gentle side to him. The woman felt a lump in her throat and tears almost fell. The husband and wife exchanged words of love for a while. The woman lay in the middle-aged man's arms and felt some changes in his body. Her pretty face suddenly became red. She said in a small voice, Master, this is the study. A moment later, the middle-aged man held the woman in his arms behind the curtains of the study. He took a whiff of her scent and asked doubtfully, What other perfume did Madam use tonight? After smelling it, your husband felt exceptionally spirited. Even the speed at which I dealt with the documents has increased. Fragrance. The woman was lying in his arms with a satisfied expression. She was stunned when she heard this. She said, I didn't use any fragrance. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered that when she was bathing at night, she had dropped a few drops of the Ruy dew that she had bought on the street into the bathtub. Could it be because of this? Yes, that handsome shopkeeper seemed to have said that this Ruy dew had the effect of refreshing the mind. Could it be that the master's unprecedented interest tonight was also because of this Ruy dew? You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.